don't think I've ever looked at a clock so intently in all my life. Alrighty, it is 10:05, so I think it's time for us to get started. There are a fair number of us on, and to that point, I want to turn things over to Dan Orchard, who's going to start things off for us.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, everyone. This is Dan Orchard with Fishing Partnership Support Services. I'm pleased to welcome you to our first webinar. In a moment, I'll turn it back over to our moderator, Tom, to explain the format, technical aspects of the webinar. But I'm going to begin by introducing Fishing Partnership and our panelists today. Most of you know Fishing Partnership Support Services already. You know that we have navigators in Massachusetts fishing communities of Gloucester, Plymouth, Chatham, and New Bedford, and that our navigators are prepared to help you with access to health insurance, health services, financial planning, safety training, and the other services that you need so you can focus on fishing. We're adapting to COVID like everyone else. We're learning new information each day about the relief programs, and we're learning new ways to get information to you. Although our physical offices are closed, I want to make sure you know that our navigators and staff are still available for you. We'll have the contact information up on a slide during this webinar of all the navigators. And if you need help with health insurance because your income's changed due to COVID, our navigators can help. If you know someone that's struggling to cope with the stress of COVID or any other stresses, you can contact us for mental health resources. And if you have financial needs, and we'll talk about some of those today, you can contact us. In general, we might not be able to help or answer every question right away, but we'll work to find a solution and a resource and a connection to help, and we'll get back to you. To get information out, we have a COVID-specific webpage now with resources that we're updating regularly. It's off our regular webpage. Is a link to it. It's one of the tabs in our webpage is going to be up on this webinar as well, but it's www.fishingpartnership.org. Today, we're also hosting this webinar, which we hope is our first of regular webinars addressing questions from the fishing community about their needs. So today's topic is about some of the SBA loans that are available for COVID and how they also interact with some of the other services that are available and resources for financial needs. I'll introduce our panelists. Morgan Eldridge is here with us. She's a navigator and community health worker based on the Cape and out of Chatham. Morgan has really been at the forefront for us at this as this pandemic has developed. She's been listening to the fishing community, learning about the resources that are available, and helping fishing families with the loan applications that we're going to talk about today. She understands the nuances of the fishing industry because she grew up in a fishing family and a fishing community. Her sister Shannon, also a navigator on the Cape, was going to be with us today, but she can't make it because she's fishing. She's setting her weir today, so we wish her luck with that. And she's available and at other times to help us with and help the fishing community with their needs. We are really lucky to have two financial advisors with us today that have worked with fishing families for years and care deeply about the fishing community. We have Steve Barkoff, who runs his own small business where he helps nonprofits create and run personal finance programs for their members. He's worked with us since 2015. And some of you know him from his popular budgeting class that he provides to fishing families through FPSS. We also have John Hughes, a CPA and principal with Clifton Larson Allen in New Bedford. And John helps clients in the fishing community with wealth advisory, accounting, tax, and consulting services. These two gentlemen and some other people have been tremendous resources for us working through the difficulties with these loans, the changing information, the absence of information, and trying to put together the best information that we can get to the fishing community about what's available to them. So I want to thank them for being available and thank everyone for listening in. I'll turn it back over to Tom, our moderator, to walk us through the rest of this webinar. Thanks, Tom.
Great, thank you, Dan, and welcome everyone. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over the logistics and all the technical stuff involved in the webinar. So I'm going to bring up what our agenda is. We already heard from Dan, which is great. So how this is going to continue for the rest of this meeting is we're going to have Morgan is going to be asking some questions of both Jonathan and Steve. And then once those have all gone, once she's covered all those, we're going to be opening up questions to all of you out there. With that said, there are two ways to ask a question. If you bring your mouse down to the bottom, you'll see a Q&A section of the webinar. With that, you can write your question, and we'll be answering those first. And if you don't want to write, then all you need to do is go back to that same section down below, raise your hand, and that'll light up here on my panel, and then I'll be calling people one at a time. And when I do that, I'll unmute you so that you're able to ask your question. So right now people are muted so that we can continue on with the webinar. But as for that, that's how things will go. We're going to go with questions that come in via the chat first when Morgan and Steve and Jonathan are done. Then we'll go to audio questions, and then we'll cover any other written questions as they come in. So my hope is to get as many questions, if not all of them, answered in our time allotted. So with that, I'll turn things over to Morgan, Steve, and Jonathan. And you are all, there we go. Morgan's unmuted, there we go.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I believe Steve is going to start with an overview of the EIDL loan. Go ahead, Steve.
Yes, good morning, everybody. The EID loan stands for Economic Injury Disaster Loan. It's one of the loans that was included in the recent legislation to help families and small businesses. There's a few notable things about this loan. One is that you should be applying directly from VA, and the fishing partnership navigators are well trained in finding that online application and assisting fishing families in completing them. The second notable thing about this loan is that it comes with an emergency grant of up to $10,000 that does not need to be paid back. But it's important to keep in mind that the loan itself, the EID loan itself, does need to be paid back. It's just the grant part that does not need to be paid back. The third notable thing is that the size of the loan is supposed to be based on the amount of economic injury that the business sustained as a result of the pandemic. And the last thing I'd point out at the top is that there has not been a lot of very detailed or clear information coming from the government on the specifics of this loan program, but we're monitoring all the details we can find on a daily basis and passing that information on to the navigators as soon as we get them. For example, there's been some uncertainty around the size of the emergency grant. At first, the government said it would be up to $10,000, but more recently, they've said that it's going to be based on the number of employees in the business, and it would be $1,000 per employee. And I haven't seen anything specific around how the government intends to measure that level of economic injury that each business sustained, and that's what they're going to be using to base the loan amount on. But even with those uncertainties, there is a lot of information about how to proceed with the loan application. And as I said before, the fishing partnership navigators are well equipped to assist you with that.
So Steve, some of the questions that we are hearing are, as far as the EIDL loans go, who can apply? Are there specific business criteria that need to be met to apply?
Yep, they're using a pretty broad definition, Morgan. So really any small business that is 500 employees or lower can apply for this, and that includes independent contractors. It includes sole proprietors who are doing business under a trade name. It would include an LLC or an S-Corp where there's one or two owners. So many different types of small businesses can apply for this loan.
Great. And what are the permitted uses of the loan? What can't you use it for?
Yeah, what we've heard is that the permitted uses have to do with working capital, which I would describe as, any obligation or expense you have in your business that typically is paid out within 12 months or less. So shorter term obligations, that would include things like consumables, fuel or food for your vessel. It would include bait and tackle. It would include payments that you make to vendors, loan payments, payroll, a whole variety of those shorter term obligations. What we believe is excluded are longer term assets. These are the kinds of things that perhaps you would be depreciating in your business over the period of several years. So examples there would include a vessel or a truck.
And so what are the benefits and the disadvantages of these loans? For example, what are the interest rates, the terms of the loan, some fees, if any?
Yeah, there are some advantages to the loan. As I mentioned before, the grant itself that's tied to the loan does not have to be paid back. So that's one of the big advantages of it. Also, it's a longer term loan of up to 30 years at a fairly low interest rate of 3.75%. So the loan itself does need to be paid back, but the terms are pretty pretty generous in terms of how soon you would need to pay that loan back. Also, there's no fees associated with the loan, no prepayment penalty, and no personal guarantees for loans under $200,000.
Very good. And if you apply, well, we'll get to that question after. But I think what we'll do is go to Jonathan Hughes from CLA to talk about the PPP loans.
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. And thank you to the Fishing Partnership for giving me the opportunity to join you here this morning, and thanks to everyone who has logged in. So as Steve mentioned, there's 2 loan programs that have been made available through the recent legislation. Steve described the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, the EIDL. The loan I'm going to talk about is the Paycheck Protection Program loan, and that is commonly referred to as the PPP. So you've likely, seen news coverage on the PPP, or perhaps you are in the process of applying for a PPP loan. This is really an unprecedented type of loan program in that the intent is to cover payroll costs for small businesses, and similar to the EIDL, that would be really a broad category of businesses, and the defining characteristic is less than 500 employees, but it could be an S Corp or an LLC or a sole proprietorship, even an independent contractor would qualify. But really what's unique about this loan is it's intended to cover payroll costs for an 8-week period. And there are some conditions with this, but assuming that that's what the funds are used for, it would be forgiven at the end of the 8 weeks. So it's really intended to keep employees with their employers, to keep independent contractors paid for an 8-week period, with the hopes that once we, get a couple months down the road here, we'll be in a better position to get back to normal, and having folks still employed is going to help the economy get started once again. So the loan is essentially 8 weeks worth of payroll plus an additional 2 weeks or half a month, which can be used for certain eligible costs, which include rent, utilities, and interest payments on loans. And again, the defining characteristic here is if you meet, the criteria of being somebody who has been affected economically, needs this loan to help with payroll costs, that you have the opportunity to get those funds forgiven at the end of the 8 weeks.
Thank you. And who can apply for the PPP loans? Are there specific business criteria that they need to meet?
Yeah, Morgan, that's a great question. So, one of the things that's different about this versus the EIDL is that you would apply directly through a lender. So you'd apply through a lender that is approved for small business administration loans. And really any type of business can apply. You can be someone who is a independent contractor, and receives a 1099. You'd be eligible to apply for this. You could also be someone that has a LLC or an S corp, and you'd also be allowed as an eligible business to apply for this loan.
And so what are the permitted uses of this loan, and what can't it be used for?
So the permitted uses, it's really a narrow scope. It's intended to cover payroll costs, which would include gross wages, in addition to health insurance costs and retirement plan contributions that are made by employers. So that's what is being defined as payroll costs. That's really the bulk of what the proceeds should be used for. In order to have the loan forgiven, 75% of the proceeds need to be used for those payroll costs. The additional 25%, you could use that for either utilities, rent, or interest payments on loans. So there is the option there to get some relief above and beyond the 8 weeks worth of payroll costs.
And what are some of the advantages or disadvantages of the PPP loans? Interest rates, terms of the loan, fees?
Yeah, Maureen, that's a great question. So, the big advantage is the ability to get those, the loan proceeds forgiven if you do use it for the payroll costs and eligible expenses. But if it turns out that you have a portion of the loan that isn't forgivable, the interest rate on this would be 1%. Which is really unheard of. So it would be a 1% loan with a 2-year term. And in addition to that, you would have the option to defer the payments for 6 months. So at the end of the 8 weeks, if it turns out that perhaps your payroll costs were reduced, you had a portion of the loan that wasn't forgiven, you could then defer the payments for 6 months, and then you'd begin paying them over a 2-year term at 1% interest.
And go ahead, sorry.
One other thing I just mentioned is that the fees for this loan are paid by the Small Business Administration. So similar to what Steve had mentioned on the EID loan, there's no application fees that are paid by the borrower, and there's also no prepayment penalty.
Very good. And one other question that either one of you can answer. If you apply for both, can you roll one of those loans into the other?
I'll start with this one, and John, chime in if you have anything more to add. We have read that it is possible to refinance an EID loan into the PPP loan, but that process seems to be reserved for older EID loans that were dispersed earlier in the year, before April 3rd. For those businesses that are receiving EID loans after that, probably the best approach would be to use them both if they both could be useful for your business, but to keep track and manage the purposes of how you're using those loans, because they need to be for separate purposes. So an example would be to use the PPP loan for payroll and those few other expenses that Jonathan just described, and then to use the EID loan for other working capital needs that go beyond those specific purposes for the PPP loan. And since it's defined pretty broadly, you can use it for really lots of different working capital needs. it shouldn't be too hard to find some purposes for the EID loan that keep it separate from the PPP loan.
Thank you both. Go ahead, Jonathan.
No, I agree, Steve. That's very well said. I mean, the big consideration there is, like you said, you just can't use the funds for the same purposes. So you would keep them separate, but you certainly could go ahead and apply and receive both loans.
Well, thank you both, Steve and Jonathan. I just wanted to go into letting you all know about what the navigators are doing to help you all as fishing families in this process. We have been working directly with Steve and Jonathan, and they have come up with some great FAQs that we are able to share with all of you. And if anybody needs to get in touch with us, once you do, we can talk about whether or not you'd like to set up a time to do an application with us. We can help walk you through that with or without Steve's help. We can, for the EID loans. We also have some information on the different banks. I do anyway right now for the Cape on where to go for the PPP loans. And in addition to that, we're here for you for any other things as well. If you need any financial resources, we can direct you in the right place. We're here to help listen. We understand this is a very stressful time, and we are here for you.
Excellent. I think if those are the questions that we have right now, Morgan, if you want to go to the ones that have been asked while we're in the during the presentation, we can go from those. We can start from there. Okay,
so we're going to start with some of the chat questions. Let's see. The first one is from Shireen, and she is asking a couple of different questions. One is for the EID loan, one is for the PPP loan. If you are a seasonal fishing business that has not started your season, how are you considered in the EIDL loan program? Do you base it on the past years?
Yes, that's one of those things that we're a little unclear on. As I said before, the government has said that the size of the EID loan will be based on the size of the economic injury that has been sustained by the business due to the pandemic. So I would think that if the size of the injury is low because you're not fishing at this time of year, then the size of the loan would be low too. But I don't think that should discourage you or preclude you from applying. The application process seems to be pretty easy. We've gone through the online application with a number of fishing families. It only takes a few minutes to do. It gets you in the queue, and it makes you eligible for the emergency grant that I described before. Meanwhile, you can wait and get more information requests from the SBA after you apply for the loan, and they're probably going to ask for your last year's tax return, and may, for seasonal businesses, ask some additional questions. We aren't completely sure about that. But I would say still go ahead and apply. There's really no harm to applying.
And the second part of her question is directly about the PPP loan. If you are a fishing boat captain with fishing crews being paid from the fishing boat proceeds and they receive a 1099, do you apply for them or do they apply on their own? And this is a pretty common question we're getting. We've been asked this a couple times so far.
Yes, the guidance we've gotten for both the EID loan and the PPP loan is that 1099 crew members should not be included in the count of employees that you report for both those loan applications. So the 1099 workers should apply on their own for these loans, and they're eligible to do so in both cases.
Yeah, that's correct, Steve. And I just want to mention that I think that when these loan programs were rolled out, it was done very quickly, and there was some confusion and conflicting information. So, you may have heard last week or at the beginning of these programs that independent contractors, 1099 crew members would be included in the loan, but that has been clarified since then. And I want to mention that because, as Morgan said, this question has come up quite a bit. And I think that, some of that is just sort of the confusion in information when these programs were first rolled out. So the crew members certainly can, and I would encourage them to, go and apply for the loans. However, the boat captain, your loan is going to be based just on actual payroll.
Okay.
Morgan, a related question that has come up is, what if I submitted the application and I mistakenly did include 1099 crew members in my count of employees? In that case, I would call the Small Business Administration and have your confirmation number handy. That confirmation number was on the last screen that you saw when you submitted the application, and just mention to the person that you mistakenly included them and you wanted to make a correction to an existing application. And they should be able to help you do that. The navigators have the number for the SBA if you can't find it.
I'll put the numbers and the phone number and the email address in the chat section if anybody needs it. And then we'll also, if you would like to contact us, our contact information will be on one of the slides at the end. So the next question comes from Peter Fallon. What are the financial documents and records I need to provide for the EIDL and the PPP loans in addition to completing the application itself?
I'll start with the EID loan. The initial application doesn't require any documentation, really. There's no kind of upload requirement for any kind of electronic documents. But we have found it very helpful to have your latest tax return handy, because it asks for some information on the gross revenue of your business and also the cost of goods sold from your business. Very handy to have your 2019 return handy, your Schedule C, for example, for your that shows your business revenue and expenses. That makes the application go much faster.
Thank you. The next question comes from V. Burpo, I think. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. He says, "Hi guys, I was in the middle of starting my charter fishing business, an S Corp, when all this started. I was at the stage of getting my business loan for the boat and equipment. Now, how should I proceed?"
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I think that some of the factors that would come into play would be when the business was started, which it sounds like unfortunately may not have finished that process. So for both of these programs, it would need to be in an existing business, and I know there is a date that's specified in the guidance, and we could certainly get that information out. I believe it's was a date in February. One of the things to look at might have been what he was doing prior to this, if there's an opportunity to apply for one of these programs as an independent contractor, perhaps. But Steve, I don't know your thoughts on this, but I think that unfortunately is a challenging situation.
Yeah, it really has to do with the specifics of the business. That if it was not in operation at all, then I don't think that these loans would apply. But if it's a new business that was operational in the beginning of this year, then there still may be opportunities to apply for them. The other thing just to keep in mind is the types of expenses that these loans qualify for. And they're pretty specific and they're more short-term in nature. So if the loan that you were proceeding with were more for long-term assets, then these loan programs wouldn't address those purchases of long-term assets really. And probably the best bet would be to continue on with that loan process until it concludes, and then you can decide, given the current market conditions, whether or not you want to proceed with that particular loan.
Okay, the next question, there's two questions from Patrick Shepard on the PPP loans. Can interest on a boat loan be an allowable expense similar to a mortgage, which is allowed? And the second question is, can fuel costs be an allowable expense similar to utilities?
Well, I'll talk about the EID loan, and John, maybe you could chime in for the PPP loan. But the EID loan would be able to be used for those types of purposes. So fuel would be considered working capital, and monthly loan payments on existing loans would also be considered working capital. So I think that those would both be approved uses for the EID loan proceeds.
Yeah, so for the PPP, as long as that boat loan was in existence on February 15th of this year, then that interest would be qualified, as one of those additional eligible expenses, above and beyond the payroll. So, the interest could qualify, and also, our understanding is that the gas would be qualified as well as a utility. The one thing I would keep in mind is that in order to get the full forgiveness on the PPP loan, 75% of the proceeds would need to be used for payroll costs, which would be the gross wages, health insurance, and retirement contributions. But that remaining 25%, it sounds like, assuming that loan for the boat was in place by February 15th, that interest would be eligible. And we also believe that you would be allowed to consider the gas a utility.
Thank you. A next question is from Karen C. We are all paying marina bills and maintenance expenses now for an upcoming season that may not happen or may be very low or negative compared to a normal season. How does this program apply to us? What would we need to do to prove expenses and impact? That's question one. What records do I need to keep track of or provide to get the loan and or to qualify for the loan forgiveness?
Yeah, I'll start with the EID loan. Those types of expenses would be considered qualified expenses. As I said before, the rule of thumb that we've heard is that the expenses should be for working capital needs. Really anything that you would be paying out of your business in the course of 12 months or less. So things like monthly marina rent payments or other marina bills, maintenance expenses, they would all fit that definition or that restriction. In terms of what records you need, it's a little unclear to us at this point. The initial application does not ask for records on your specific expenses. But as I've said a couple of times, the size of the loan is supposed to be based on the size of the economic injury that your business has sustained. So I'm expecting that the SBA would come back and ask for some of those records. I would just, keep good records of what your business is paying. So pay those expenses out of your business checking account. If you have paper-based or email-based invoices, keep good records of those things that you'll be able to submit later on. I would avoid paying things in cash where there's no record of the payment. Pay with a check or online bill payment that would flow through a business checking account.
Steve, I think that's great advice. And, the EID loan is, really that's the intent of the loan, is to cover those types of working capital expenses. So that would be, the program that would provide the most relief. There may be some expenses that you can cover with the PPP, perhaps. There might be some rent there that you could include, but in that situation, the EID would be the most beneficial to cover those working capital expenses.
Okay, so the next question is from Scott. While applying for the SBA grant, I started to apply and reached a point where they wanted my checking routing account number with no other option for a payment. I got freaked out and backed away. Does anyone have experience with this process for the grant, and was I on the correct site? I'm happy to send you a link, Scott, to the correct site, but I do know that you do have to provide them with your bank account, your business bank account information in the application.
The one other thing I would say, Morgan, is that if anybody is concerned about fraudulent activity in their checking account, I would just make a habit of checking your transactions, using the bank's online banking system, maybe on a weekly basis. And if you see anything that looks suspicious, report it immediately to the bank. There is fraud protection on bank accounts, but some of it depends on how quickly you notify the bank. So that's why I like people to be checking their transactions regularly and reporting anything suspicious right away.
Thank you. So the next question is from Greg. Can you collect unemployment if you get a PPP loan?
Yeah, that's a difficult question at this point. We're not entirely certain how that will be handled. We're waiting some further clarification to come out from the Small Business Administration on how the unemployment could potentially be impacted by the PPP. My advice on this would be to go ahead and apply for both benefits. We will likely have further information on this in the coming days, and there's going to be some time involved with processing the PPP application and getting to the point where you have an approval and would be able to receive the funding. So I know we're not able to fully answer that question at the moment, but that would be my advice, would be to go ahead with both applications at this point and look for further clarification as we move forward.
The one thing I would add there is that within Fishing Partnership, we're doing a lot of work investigating these types of questions related to unemployment benefits. We know some of the things that are on people's minds, especially on how unemployment might interact with these loan programs. So we're working hard to find answers to those questions. Some of you may already have seen the FAQ documents that we created for the EID loan and the PPP loan, and we're going to be producing similar type of documents for unemployment. So stay tuned with that, and you'll be hopefully within a short period of time be able to get that kind of detailed information from the navigators.
All right, there's another question from Jim. Hello, I'm a 1099 employee and a local shell fisherman. Does my loss of both 1099 and shell fishing income qualify in EID or PPP loan?
Yeah, I would say the answer to that is yes. In both cases, that loss of income could be considered. The only thing I would say is, as we mentioned before, if you end up getting approved for both loans, you would want to use them for separate purposes. So perhaps use the PPP loan to sustain your payroll, which could just be based on your own income that you would normally be earning this time of year, and then use the EID loan for other working capital needs.
Yeah, and the you know, as a 1099 contractor, you absolutely can apply for these loans, and there's been some further guidance that's come out recently for independent contractors and applying for the PPP. So certainly would encourage you to do that.
Thank you. The next question is from Greg. If PPP loans are pre-calculated on adjusted gross income for fishermen and 1099 crewmen and 1099 crewmen not counted as employees, how are struggling fishermen supposed to get any financial assistance for boat expenses? Adjusted gross income deducts all the expenses out and just shows your profit.
So with the PPP, really the intent is to, you know, cover the payroll costs. So, you know, to the extent you had payroll wages for yourself, or if there are other folks who are actual employees, those would be counted towards the loan calculation for the PPP loan. The EID loan may be a better option there as far as being able to cover some of the other expenses. But we absolutely, you know, we understand the situation, because, you know, initially when there was more of a thought that, you know, the PPP would include independent contractors, you know, that would have been the more beneficial option, I think, for you know, many boat owners, but unfortunately that was not something that is being allowed here in kind of the final guidance. So it may be that it's going to require a combination of both of these loans to, you know, to provide the relief that you need.
Okay, great. Let's see here.
Morgan, if you want to switch over to phones or audio questions that come in now, and then we can return back to those other ones, that would be something. That way we can get everybody asking all their questions. How's that sound?
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. So if you have a question and you're on the phone, you can unmute yourself and just state your name, and we'll get to your question.
Actually, it might be a little smoother if people want to just raise their hands using that, so we don't have a lot of people talking at the same time, Morgan. So
Oh, right.
then I can unmute them as they come.
Okay, just raise your hand.
I think everybody's more, oh, there we go. We got a question from Lisa Mahoney. Go Go ahead, Lisa.
She's muted.
Oh, sorry about that. If you applied for the PPP, and now I'm just learning that it really is only if you have wages and not 1099 employees, if you still use 25% of that for your other expenses, is that forgiven even if you don't have 75% to use for payroll?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it isn't in all or nothing, but the amount that is going to be forgiven is going to be determined based on the payroll costs that you have. So the way I would look at it is that 75% of what's going to be forgiven is going to be the payroll costs. So you potentially have an additional 25% that you could use for those other eligible expenses, utilities, rent, or interest on loans.
Thank you.
I think it might end up that what happens is I think at least you're in a similar position as many folks who applied based on that old guidance that the contractors were included. So you're going to end up with a portion at the end that isn't forgiven, and then that would become the 2-year loan at 1%.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else has a question, simply raise your hand. Oh, we got a question from Jay. Can you hear me, Jay?
I hear you, but I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. A couple of things. For the IED, we have to have, it's $1,000 per employee. Is that the way that's written? The grant?
Yeah, that's the latest information that we've gotten from the Small Business Administration, Jay.
Okay, we're just starting. The boat has to be put in the water. The gear is getting ready to be set probably in another 3 or 4 weeks. In the meantime, the lobster prices look like they're collapsing. We have heavy expenses right now. As far as payroll is concerned, there is very little. One person with me. It's just a 2-man operation. How do we even qualify for any of this? We're going to be broke by the time the boat goes in the water, and the market has collapsed to the point where the income will probably be under the expenses, and the accumulated expenses are going on right this minute. I've made an application. I think a couple of weeks ago when I first got the first email, and haven't even heard anything from the SBA. So it's kind of like floating around saying, are we going to survive? What's going to happen?
Yes, that's very frustrating. A lot of people are very frustrated with how slow this has been, and the lack of transparency and the lack of communication. That emergency grant was supposed to be paid out within 3 to 5 days, and it's clearly been a lot longer than that. I think in times like these, the best thing to do is try to control what you can control, and that would be applying for the loans and seeing what you hear back from them for both the EID loan and the PPP loan, because as we've said earlier on this call, they can provide relief in a variety of ways, payroll and non-payroll expenses.
And Jay, did you say you've applied for both loans, or did you apply for the EID?
EID only, and kind of waiting to see what happens with unemployment. But so far, things seem so incredibly slow. It seems to be more talk than action. as an aside, I think that I certainly am, and probably most of my peers appreciate the fact that you're putting all this time and effort into it, because we're clearly, or I am clearly, not an expert at how to get through this minefield.
Yeah, Jay, we certainly understand we appreciate that, and we understand the frustration. I would just say with, it might be worth having a conversation with your bank about applying for the PPP also. I think the timing on the funding for that could end up being sooner than the EID loan. I do have a client that I work with that is actually closing on their PPP loan today, and that's going to be the first business that I have direct experience with that's going to get the funding. Others have received approval on their applications, but they haven't closed yet. But as Steve had mentioned, we initially were thinking, or we were told that it was going to be that 3 business day turnaround on the emergency grants, and that certainly is far from the reality of what's happened. So I just I mentioned that it might be worth having that conversation with your lender, and you might be able to get some relief a little bit sooner through the PPP.
I don't understand, Jonathan. Are we working with our normal banking sources, or are we working through the SBA? How does that work? I'm confused.
Yeah, great question. So the EID, which you applied for, was directly through the SBA. The PPP, the Payroll Protection Program, is through a lender. So, I would start with the bank that you currently use, and have a conversation with them to see if they are accepting applications for the PPP loan. But that's a great question, because one loan is going directly with the SBA, the other is with your lender. And I think, Jay, if your lender isn't accepting applications, that will be something where if you reach back out to us, we can do our best to try to connect you with another lending resource.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Let's see. There's a couple of more chat questions. Do we want to go to that real quick? Okay.
Yeah, that sounds great, because I think we've exhausted all the ones from the phone right now. So why don't we do that?
Okay. All right. So we have from Rich. We filled out the loan form over 2 weeks ago. When will we hear if there's further information needed?
Yeah, so I guess you're talking about the EID loan. As I've said, there's been a real lack of communication and transparency on this. But yeah, I would just say that you're not alone. A lot of other applicants haven't heard much of anything either. So just stay tuned and check your email regularly. Check your kind of your spam folder to see if maybe communications that come in through there. But if you did receive a confirmation number at the end of your application, then it has been received.
And the next question is from Peter. The cost of goods sold is just your total expenses, right?
On that one, I would say that they're probably looking for something more specific from your latest tax return. So if you file your business income and expenses through a Schedule C, your cost of goods sold would be on, for 2019, it would be on line 4. It says cost of goods sold. And if you're an S Corp and you're filing an 1120S form, cost of goods sold is on line 2.
Okay. And then the next, this is kind of more of a statement and a request for information, but it says, it's from Pat. I am a Bank of America customer, called them for the PPP loan. They said they are requiring their customers to have a business checking account. I have been in business since 2006, been filing my taxes since then, Schedule C, yet they told me no dice and I can't change my account over. I have since contacted an online lender called New Tech, and they actually got back to me, but only to say that they would be contacting me. I also did get an email back from SBA about my EIDL application and supposedly should see the money in my account shortly. Can you recommend other lenders who are not requiring you to be a previous customer and are accepting applications for the PPP loan? SBA told me the banks are supposed to be taking apps for non-customers, which would make what Bank of America told me no, but hey, have not changed their policy.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that's been a point of frustration for a lot of folks. Ultimately, it's the banks that are administering the PPP loans, and they all have different policies and rules. And so, I think a lot of people have run into similar roadblocks. So I think that's maybe if we can get your contact information here and reach back out, we could suggest a lender based on where you're located. I think lenders at this point, it looks like are starting to open up the programs a little bit more to non-customers. So I think there is some reason there for optimism, but we can do our best to connect you with a resource.
The one thing I would add is if you are beginning to talk to what I would call a non-traditional lender, like this company called New Tech, I'm really not familiar with them as a bank or a lender. Maybe a good idea to call the Small Business Administration and just confirm that that company is an SBA approved lender, just to make sure that they're legitimate.
Yeah, that's great advice, Steve. I think, that's related to what you said, Steve. I think, unfortunately, given everything that is going on and, the scramble here to get help, unfortunately, it's inevitable that we're going to see an increase here in fraud and identity theft and things like that. So I think your advice, Steve, was right on point. If this is an institution that you're not familiar with, you certainly want to do your homework to make sure that's legitimate and you're not potentially putting yourself at risk.
Okay, the next question is from Jay. Do we know the status of the federal help for commercial fishing under the CARES Act?
I personally am not too familiar with that. There's another member of the fishing partnership team who has been looking into that in quite a bit of detail. And I think that there is some information that could be distributed on that. So maybe we could just keep, Morgan, maybe we could just keep track of that question and get that information out.
Okay. And the next question is, if the only benefit I get approved for is unemployment, can I still run my boat to recover some of my vessel expenses as long as I don't make a profit? There are no other ways for guys to try to survive. That's from Greg.
So that's an excellent question, again, about how the unemployment program is going to be managed for people who normally would not be eligible for unemployment in the first place, people running their own small businesses or independent contractors and so forth. I don't have the answer to that question right now, but as I said, we're working hard to gather as many insights as we can about how the unemployment program is going to work, and I'm going to write that question down specifically. You know, the way traditional unemployment works is that if you begin to work again and your income is still not up to the level that it was before, then you have to report whatever income you're currently earning, and you'd still potentially be eligible for a partial benefit. But I don't know how that all is going to translate to a small business, where, as you mentioned, you're covering expenses first before you're taking any of the income for yourself. So it's all to say that I don't have a specific answer for you, but we'll add that. We have a running list of open questions that we're trying to close out, and I'm going to add that to the list.
Okay. And I think this is just a reminder of where people might be able to get the SBA application. This is a question, are there 2 applications and where do we find them? So one would be, where's the EIDL application and what do we do about the PPP?
So Morgan, I don't know if we'd be able to send out a link, or if that's available on our website. The EID loan would be directly through the Small Business Administration. You could also, I think if you Googled SBA EID, okay.
I can say it if anybody wants to write it down. I can just say it right now. The SBA EIDL loan is found at COVID19 relief.sba.gov. And I'll put it in the chat as well.
And then the PPP would be through your banking relationship. In each, the applications are fairly similar from bank to bank, but each bank is a little bit unique. I think there was a question earlier about what supporting information is required for the PPP application, and again, that comes down to what the bank is requiring, but typically they're looking for copies of your quarterly payroll filings, the Form 941, and they also may request information, for example, if you're adding health insurance benefits to the amount of your payroll costs, they may ask for copies of the health insurance invoices to support the application.
Morgan, if I can just interject, I know we went over our 11 o'clock time, but because these questions are so important, we're going to keep going as we go through all these questions. I just want people to know that we're going till our questions are answered.
Okay. We can, I think there's one more question if we want to do it.
Cool, great.
Okay. So this is from Tim, if you are self-employed with no payroll or business mortgage or utilities or rent, is there any benefit to the PPP other than the low interest loan?
So Tim, that's a great question, and some guidance actually came out yesterday on how the PPP would work for folks like yourself that are self-employed. So the benefit would be they're going to calculate your loan amount based on the self-employment income that you reported on your personal tax return, and calculate what kind of 2 months worth of that income would amount to. And, you know, if you don't have other expenses that would be eligible, you would be able to get a loan for, you know, 2.5 times that monthly self-employment income, and you'd be eligible to get the, you know, the 2 months or the 8 weeks forgiven, and then that remaining half a month, you could either repay at the end of the 8-week period, or you could, you know, have that convert into that 2-year loan at the 1%. But, you know, to answer your question, really the benefit of you applying would be the potential to get, you know, 2 months worth of your income through the loan, and then have that amount forgiven.
Okay, thank
That's
you.
great.
And the last question, I am a boat captain and receive my 1099 to my S Corp through the owner. Is the corporate 1099 eligible for the PPP loan?
Yeah, it would be. So you'd essentially be reporting as, yeah, I think there might be some complexity to that question, but I think if I understand it, you would have some self-employment income through that 1099 that you're receiving. And I think similar to Tim's question, you know, the calculation would be based on the, you know, 2.5 months worth of your self-employment income that you're receiving on that 1099.
All right. I have applied for the EID loan. How does the SBA know how many W-2 employees I have?
Yes, on the online application there, you should have seen a field for your number of employees, and that would have been the spot to put that figure in.
And Tim asked, is the earliest time to apply for the PPP April 30th still?
So the PPP, this is a good question. So the 8-week period for the PPP would start from when you receive the loan funding. So you can, you could potentially, you know, receive that funding before April 30th, but the program is open through June 30th. Assuming that there's, you know, funding that's still available at that time, but it would be based on the 8 weeks from the time that you actually received the loan.
I think the April 30th date Tim's referring to might be the unemployment, the expected time to apply for unemployment. And I believe that is all the questions that we have.
I do. I want to thank everybody for submitting their questions, and obviously the panelists. I'm going to turn things over to Dan Orchard, who will lead us out.
Okay, you've got Dan Orchard and Millie now. We're all coping with COVID and no daycare. But I want to thank everybody, and again, thank our panelists as well. Well, we understand the frustrations that we're hearing also with all of this, and I know this has already been expressed, but we feel it. We have navigators that are in fishing families that are dealing with this stress. We have other employers that are dealing with this stress. We understand it. What we're going to do from some of this, you've got our navigator information up on the screen now. You can contact us. We will try to answer more questions. We will hear about your concerns, and we'll prioritize them to try to get resources towards them. Secondly, some of the unanswered questions from this, Steve and John and Morgan and some of our staff have been great about taking these questions and then doing more research and putting it together in a frequently asked questions document that we have on our webpage. So we'll be putting that up and hopefully answering more of your questions that way. And then one other thing that we haven't brought up yet is Some of our politicians have been very receptive to these concerns. We've been expressing them up to them. Senator Markey's office, Senator Warren's office has had calls, Representative Moulton, and I know others have as well. And we'll keep expressing these frustrations to try to make sure that the fishing community doesn't fall through the cracks on this. We want to make sure that these loan programs and other services recognize the unique circumstances of a fishing business. And apply to them as well. So we'll keep doing that. We know that other fishing associations are doing that, and encourage you to get that voice up, be more powerful that way. You can pass on that information to navigators as well, the more concerns, and we'll keep passing it up. And then the final thing for feedback is, this is a new webinar for us, and we're looking at ways to pass information. So you can also communicate ways that we've done this well, or things we can do better. Please pass that over to a navigator or send us emails or give us a call, and we'll work on all of that as well. So thanks everyone for joining. Tom, I'll turn it back over to you to close it up.
Great, thank you so much. To reiterate what Dan said, thank you all for your participation. Those who attended, those our guests, our speakers, obviously, and everyone in the back end's keeping this running. To Dan's point, if we can do things better, please let your navigator know how we can do that. Our goal is to make sure that all your questions are answered and that we have as much information as it becomes available for you up to date. These will be going on every week, Wednesday, 10 to 11. And with that, I will say goodbye to everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much. Take care, gang.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.